It's 1-0 Belgium. 20 minutes left.
We are now live from River Valley Room. For those who are joining on live or online, we are just waiting a few more moments before beginning.
Okay, I would like to call this meeting back to order and do a quick roll call of committee members. Councillor Stevenson.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Knack.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Rice.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Rutherford.
Hello.
And I'll check if other council members joining us. Councillor Salvador.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Joanne Wright.
Good afternoon.
Councillor Principe.
Hello.
Councillor Tang.
Good afternoon.
And Councillor Cartmel.
Good afternoon.
All right, that's everyone. And we are going into our item 7.6, update on emergency shelter space in Edmonton. Andre will walk us through the presentation, but before he does that, I just want to give committee and council members just a very quick, brief update around our conversations with the province on ramping up the the 450 emergency shelters that they committed to in October. Work is being done on that. I think 300 or so are in operation. Others will be over the next couple of weeks. And also, province recognizes that that is not enough. That because of Shingella situation and unforeseen situations, they're willing to do more. Just had a very positive conversation with Minister Nixon and Minister Schultz right up. We're coming out of that meeting now, and that our collaboration continues with them, and so we'll be able to find some collaborative way of providing additional support on the interim. But at the same time, they committed to working with us on long-term solutions on this. So it's a good. Building on the relationship that we already had. So, but we might have to move forward on our own immediately. But then we'll figure out the partnership or cost sharing in over the next couple of weeks. Andre.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Councillors. So joining me today for this presentation are Jennifer Flamin, Deputy City Manager of Community Services, Stacey Gelatli, our Branch Manager of Social Development. Jared Abbott is here for Homeless Response Coordinator, Social Development, and Hani Kwan, our Manager of Housing Policy and Partnerships in Social Development, as well as Jennifer Little, our lawyer from Legal Services Branch. We are here today with an update on vulnerable Edmontonians in encampments and transit, and the emergency shelter situation as of today here in the City of Edmonton. And we will be bringing forward a recommendation for your consideration at the end of this briefing. I want to start by saying that the current situation is clear. Homeward Trust's by name list indicates that more than 2,650 Edmontonians are experiencing homelessness. And of those on the list, about 1,250 people self-identify as primarily sleeping in emergency shelters or outdoors. As you are aware, there is a Shingella outbreak occurring in Edmonton. The current outbreak appears to be primarily experienced by people experiencing homelessness and is caused by inadequate access to hygiene resources, or essentially not having a home. As of November 17th, AHS identified 173 cases of Shigella, with 66% of those cases requiring some level of hospitalization. On November 9th, during the last cold snap in Edmonton, a number of challenges emerged. Shelter capacity was at 98% that night, although more spaces have been provided since. 408 people were escorted from transit stations at closing in the most empathetic way we could, with social supports and access to shelters and other places. Individuals were still residing in a number of large high-risk encampments. And the city has received more than 8,300 encampment-related complaints to date, which is a 34% increase from last year. Within these encampments, there is a heightened risk of fire and other safety hazards, particularly at larger encampment sites, as we've seen tragically with the loss of life in the past 2 weeks. As the situation has continued to evolve through the summer and fall, memos and status updates have been provided to Council. We have continued to focus on transit safety and ensuring transit spaces are used as intended in order to support ridership. And that has been successful from a transit safety plan. And we are seeing an increased ridership that is one of the highest levels in the country post-COVID. But that has resulted in more and more folks being removed from transit during lockups at night. Initially, shelter operators have been challenged to find staff, and therefore additionally, the additional 450 shelter spaces announced on October 1st have been somewhat slower to come online. Couple this with the severity of encampment situations and the challenges associated with the Shigella outbreak. Simply put, the landscape for supports needed for vulnerable Edmontonians has changed significantly in the last 5.5 weeks. I'll now provide an overview of the current supports being provided to vulnerable Edmontonians. In response to unprecedented need for vulnerable Edmontonians, the government of Alberta supplemented its existing 622 shelter spaces with funding and resources for an additional 450 spaces, raising the total number of funded shelter spaces to 1,072. This morning, I got further update that approximately 300 of those additional 450 spaces have now been opened, with the remainder anticipated to be operationally ready no later than mid-December. But I also should stress that the department is working really hard to advance that date with every thing they can. And I do want to acknowledge the incredible effort and cost of doing this by the province and the department we've been working with in CSS. They have really stepped up based on their 1st of October announcement, and we understand the challenges of staff and construction and things to get that done. Now, in response to the Shigella outbreak, the city is coordinating to provide supports and funding for 7 additional temporary washroom locations. In addition, 2 of the washroom locations will have showers, and 1 of the locations will be a hygiene hub with washrooms, showers, and laundry facilities. Each of the locations will be staffed with attendants, providing people using the sites with access to hand sanitizer, sanitary wipes, clean clothing, and bottled water. The city will continue its extreme weather activations. During activations, Edmonton Transit Service will operate bus routes designed to help transport vulnerable people to emergency shelters. And previously, we have activated this at minus 20 degrees Celsius. We're making adjustments so that we activate this service at minus 10 degrees Celsius. The city is also providing funding to Al Rashid Mosque to assist them in providing up to 75 additional overnight shelter spaces. And on that note, I am so impressed and pleased with the way Al Rashid Mosque stands up in the city of Edmonton. They are simply amazing, and I just want to thank them and let them know how grateful we are for their support. Shukran. The City of Edmonton is also providing funding to a number of sector agencies to enhance supports and provide new services. This includes with the Bissell Centre encampment housing workers and the extension of Bissell Day Services contracts funded by the City. With Boyle Street Community Services, the expanded day service capacity programming and expanded outreach on bus hours. Supports are being provided, but the situation continues to evolve. The Government of Alberta now provides 935 operational shelter beds, and they are nearly filled. Depending on the temperatures outside, between 150 to 400 people a night require transport from transit stations to safe locations to spend the night. There are a number of active encampments, and recent closures are displacing between 140 and 160 people per week just based on this alone. It is becoming clear that additional shelter spaces are needed for this winter. Now, we regularly monitor shelter occupancy through regular updates from the Government of Alberta on shelter usages, while supplementing with information directly from the shelter operators themselves. As we look at the shelter usage over time, it's important to consider that shelter usage moves up and down, dependent on a number of factors. When we look at historical usage, we generally see greater shelter usage during cold weather events. And when we examine the last year's numbers, the nights with the highest usage coincide with the cold nights. And what that analysis tells us is that based on this data, once the temperature drops below minus 10, shelters are full. And knowing that our Edmontonian winters are like, we can expect the demand to be strong during those winter nights. Last year, we experienced roughly 40 nights and temperatures below minus 20, and given it takes at least 4 weeks to stand up shelter beds, waiting really isn't an option. And so we think we need to plan for those 40, minus 20 and below nights, not for nights like this past Monday where it was minus 5 degrees. And arguably we did have 100 vacancies in one of our shelters on Monday night, but again it was minus 2 to 3 degrees, not minus 20 or 30. Since we last discussed the winter shelter situation in Edmonton back in October, there have been some significant changes in the ecosystem that have highlighted the need for some discussion today. As mentioned, the recent dip in overnight temperatures has resulted in more people using shelters, and shelter data clearly showed a spike in demand related to weather. There has been an increase in encampments and encampments reporting Shigella outbreaks, so we now have this health aspect of the vulnerable people. We have seen an increase in high-risk encampments. Due to critical safety concerns with these high-risk encampments, they continue to be closed, and this week 7 such high-risk encampments were enclosed, resulting in 140 to 160 individuals being displaced. We have also seen an increase in people gathering in transit spaces. During extreme temperatures, many of these individuals will accept the ride to shelters using our bus services. However, some individuals decline the service, and we are seeing an increase in break-in and re-entry attempts at transit stations. Over the recent weeks, depending on the night, we have seen between 150 to 400 individuals at transit stations where we're trying to provide them supports, movement to shelters and other places that are safer. While the province has contributed, as mentioned previously, there have been challenges with opening some of the new spaces in a timely manner, largely due to staff resources and site preparation timelines, but I also want to commend the province for working through those shortages as quickly as possible. But even with the planned 1,072 spaces, if they are operational by mid-December, we're seeing that there is a greater demand than supply. And finally, since October, administration worked to better determine details around the Jasper Place Wellness Centre, including a location and operating cost to provide a more accurate cost to provide service. And administration also finalized further budget analysis for the upcoming budget deliberations, allowing us to know our full 2022 surplus situation, which I'll talk about in a moment. And we also know that we have continued to see tragic deaths among the vulnerable related to their houseless state. While a number of shelter options have been explored in the past several months, including leasing large hotels, temporary trailers, congregate warehouse spaces, at this time we feel only one feasible option has been identified for more urgency. Administration received a proposal in early October from the Jasper Place Wellness Centre to provide an emergency shelter space through a combination of congregate, which would likely be mats or cots on the floor, and private rooms. As a temporary space not custom designed for emergency shelter, it will be difficult to meet all of the council-endorsed minimum emergency shelter standard guidelines. Administration could work with the operator to ensure the maximum alignment as possible within the physical limitations of the space, time, and funding available. The proposal, which is an important partnership with Tall Cree Nation, includes a congregate living space for 150 spaces and 59 units of single occupancy transition housing. Programming would include 24/7 staffing, security and drug poisoning response, health services, and case management support. There would also be a drop-in center and community health center operating in conjunction with the site. Now, the total cost for 209 spaces is $7.5 million, and this would be for a 6-month deployment. Please note that the sector has faced significant staffing challenges recently, which could impact timelines for standing up these shelter spaces, but the operator is confident 4 weeks would be sufficient to staff up this site. Jasper Place Wellness Centre has current staff they could redeploy to the site and would be able to access new staff who would not be interested in some of the other options, according to them. Further, the site would require some logistical checkpoints to be passed, such as updating permitting of the site for the congregate shelter space, and we're already starting some concurrent activity on that. The addition of this space would bring the total number of shelter spaces to 1,281, all spaces being operational, including the full 450 that the province is adding. If council decides to support this option, administration would propose the financial stabilization reserve be used as the funding source. Now, the current balance of the FSR is $119.4 million, and the minimum required balance by policy is $112.9 million. The proposed operating budget is recommending the use of $6.7 million in 2023 and 4 for the community safety and well-being strategy. This combined with $7.5 million for emergency shelters would bring the FSR balance to $105.2 million, which is $7.7 million below its minimum required balance. That being said, based on current projections, administration is managing within about 98% of its budget targets and is expecting a tax-supported surplus in 2022 of $67 million. And this number will be reported in detail in a report to council that will be released tomorrow afternoon. Now, this is sufficient to bring the FSR above the minimum balance. So in summary, the FSR would temporarily drop below the minimum balance. However, the balance will increase above the minimum required based on the 2022 year-end projected tax-supported surplus in 2023. And again, the sources of that surplus will be detailed in a report to council that will go public tomorrow. Now, the per capita operating costs are higher for this proposal than the GOA currently provides to existing operators. The GOA spaces cost roughly $11,000, while this proposal costs up to $36,000. The proposal administration has brought forward to you today, though, does provide a number of advantages over existing shelter options that are consistent with the minimum shelter standards that council has identified. This includes operating the shelter spaces 24/7 with enhanced supports. Some of the Government of Alberta shelter spaces we don't think will be 24/7. The congregate shelter spaces will be operated through a registered MAP program. This will allow clients some stability as they can access the same space each night, provide stability, and allows for easier provision of housing supports and services. The operator would also ensure shelter spaces would not remain empty if clients did not return on a particular night. And this proposal also has the ability to move clients from congregate spaces to private transition beds under one roof, which is particularly helpful given the health conditions. These shelter and transition spaces do require more resources than what the Government of Alberta is funding for similar space numbers. Part of that cost driver is the level of supports being provided and the type of spaces, as the 59 transitional spaces are more costly than congregate spaces for obvious reasons. The short operating time frame means sunk costs such as preparing for the site are not able to be amortized over a longer period. There is also a loss of economies of scale which is being utilized at other shelter sites, as this site is new and not adding new beds to a current site, which is the case for many of the government-funded sites. The operator will also be offering higher wage amounts at some point to attract the quality of staff that they're bringing in. All of these elements are intended to bring the shelter as close as possible to the minimum shelter standards within the limited time, space, and resources that are reasonably available. Furthermore, supporting a greater number of operators in the sector will create more options for vulnerable Edmontonians, which we see as confidence to increase the uptake of going to some of these shelters. And I would also add that the location of this place is consistent with the public safety plan that the city produced and was supported by the province, in that it creates some decentralization from the downtown of shelter spaces, which again is consistent with what we had in our safety plan. So we are recommending today that attachment 1 be added to November 23rd, 22 Community Services Verbal Report, CS 011603, that attachment 2 be added to the November 23rd, 2022 Community Services Verbal Report, CS 01603, and the actions within it approved, and that Executive Committee recommend to City Council that actions outlined in attachment 1 of the November 23rd, 2022 Community Services Verbal Report, CS 01603, be approved. The attachments mentioned in the motion cover two elements, the project and subsidy approval and the subsidy funding agreement, general terms and conditions that would be required to implement this action. So we're very interested in your direction or comment on the temporary shelter approach and the situation we find ourselves in, and we're now open to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
So can you just point to the motion, sorry? Here you go, got it. Attachment 1, yeah, got it. And that is the motion would be required, right, for it to give you direction?
That is what we need to make sure that this report...
Microphone.
That is what we need to make sure the report is properly registered in the committee. The next slide is what the motion would look like if it's adopted by council. So if we can go to the next one.
We have to add and then we can do actions.
Yeah. So it is the attachment 1, right?
Correct.
Project and subsidy approval.
Correct.
That's what size, that the 2022 operating budget for social development branch will increase by 7.5 million on one-time basis. Oh, got it. Okay.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, that would need to be moved and debated by the committee and go to council, right?
Yeah, and I think the distinguishing point, Mayor, is that we think an executive committee has the authority to approve the first recommendation, which is that the attachment be added, and the second recommendation, which is attachment 2 be added. But of course, council has to approve the third recommendation.
Got it. Okay, good. All right, council members, colleagues, questions? Let me pull it up here for the. All right, so, okay. Sign up, please. Here you go. Councilor Knack?
Thank you, Mayor Sohi. Thanks for putting this together in such short notice and for all the work that we're getting to this point. So, trying to appreciate the fact that we have new ministers, and I'm going to try to ask my questions in a way that isn't seem too frustrated, because we have different ministers who we're working with right now. So I'm just setting the tone here, because we're hearing about the folks who are dying on our streets right now, and it's getting frustrating to see this year after year. Do they understand, does the province understand now, do they have a better understanding that this constant piecemeal approach, which they seem to be taking every single year, or in some cases no year at all, is causing some of this challenge? The fact that we can't get staff in these places, it's no wonder, because if you're guaranteed a job for 3 or 4 or 5 months versus somebody who can get a permanent job, like this is part of the ongoing struggle that we're dealing with every year. Do they understand that now? Like, are they finally at the point where hopefully this is the last winter, that we're not setting ourselves up trying to respond at the last minute?
Councillor, I believe the answer to that question is yes. And the reason I say that is because the Homelessness Task Force report was presented and published and accepted by the minister on the 1st of October. And at the same time, we also got a commitment to move and add an additional 450 spaces. That has not happened before, and many of the recommendations in the minister's report that the task force provided have been accepted by government, and we're seeing movement and leadership to move on all those action items. But to be fair, that was on the 1st of October that was done. And so that to me is why I do believe the answer is yes, because previously things like that were not getting through for whatever reason, but that has been accepted. So
do they, I guess the other piece to that, and so I mean, obviously being clear, like whenever the motion goes on the floor, I'm going to be fully supporting it. We have no choice but to do this at this point. I'm just trying to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for greater long-term success going forward, because again, even this funding is only for this winter and next winter. It's not over the summer. No. And so I'm wondering if there's a appreciation that even by only doing it in the winters, we're very much likely setting ourselves up for a similar situation 1 year from now. Do they maybe understand that piece now, that maybe that they have to rethink even that most recent announcement?
yeah, I do believe they do, and I think another thing that causes me to feel that way is the Premier's mandate letter to the Minister of Municipal Affairs, which was published on the 9th of November, so very recent. But in that mandate, the Minister of Municipal Affairs is directed to work with the Minister of Seniors, Community and Social Services, who is the lead, and engage with large and mid-sized cities to ensure the province is paying its appropriate share to address issues of homelessness and mental health and addiction services. So that is another reason I feel that the message is through, because I have never seen guidance like that in a mandate letter to a minister on this particular issue.
And if I can quickly add, even the conversation today started with, let's figure out this winter, then work on long-term strategy.
Okay, good.
I think there's and that came from both Minister Nixon as well as from Minister Scholz, and her proactively reaching out to us on this.
Good. Okay, thank you. The location is in the ward that I represent, and I think my understanding is that there's a lot of folks in the West End experiencing houselessness who don't feel comfortable coming downtown right now, and that's part of why we need this location and filling up what seems to be a pretty big gap right now. Even when they're getting bus tickets to come to the downtown, they're not coming. Is that why we've looked at this location?
That's one of the reasons for sure, and as I mentioned, it's also consistent with let's not add more spaces downtown in our effort to decentralize some of this from the downtown core. But I would also say it's and probably the primary reason is we got this proposal from Jasper Place Wellness Center, and the fact that it's a partnership with Tall Cree Nation is exactly what I believe council has directed us to do with some of these spaces and get that Indigenous involvement in how we operate these spaces.
Thank you. I'm out of time.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rutherford.
I'm trying to keep myself composed right now. I heard a lot in that presentation about how the landscape has changed significantly and the context has changed, but I feel like I was saying since September that this was absolutely the situation we were going to be in. And I don't know if legal's here or what I'm allowed to say about private conversations, but this is not unforeseeable to me. This was not unforeseeable, and now we are on our back foot trying to make it up. And so I'm trying to stay composed, but I don't think the narrative that this was unforeseeable is a fair narrative. And I'll own that. I'll own that in the decisions that I made. So I'm just going to try to focus on questions that I have, because I don't want to belabor that piece. You mentioned, Mr. Corbould, that there was 7 additional washrooms with attendants at each of them. Where is that cost coming from, and why was that not included as an attachment?
So that's a combined work between ourselves and AHS. So we have some capacity within our area to provide supports for emergency response such as this. So we've worked with AHS to make sure that those are in place. But if you'd like particulars, we can follow up with that.
I would absolutely like particulars on the cost of that. My second question is, if we've had those conversations with the province and they have said that they see, I mean, it's clear as day, anybody that's listening should be upset, as we are in this room. All of us are, collectively. Why are they not providing that $7.5 million? Was there a conversation about that amount of money that we need to get those other beds, and that we can work in partnership with the province to get those beds up and running? But could they not transfer that money to us? Was that a part of the conversation? It
was definitely a part of the conversation, Councillor, but we have not been able to get a yes on that.
I think the reason that there's no consensus on it because they're disputing the cost. They think that our cost is higher than what it cost them. So I think that'll be part of the kind of discussion.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a factor. There's a discussion about cost, I think, and the spaces that have been added are the ones that have been added to Hope Mission primarily, and as we've mentioned for a long time, we're worried about all the spaces being provided by one provider. So there's another significant advantage to this, which is that we're getting another provider involved. We're getting Indigenous involvement in the provision of services.
And then I guess my question too is because, you know, we've talked about shelter standards, and like MAP programs are very undignified. They're very undignified, and so I guess at what point, and this is more for advocacy for the province, but at what point, what is the price tag of dignity? Because yes, you can do things cheaper, but at what cost? And I would hope that that's a piece of the advocacy that you're doing.
Yeah, and I would say, Councillor, that the answer to that is in minimum shelter standards. And the fact that it's in a minister's report now that accepts that we have to have a minimum shelter standard, I think that is a step in the right direction. But the minimum shelter standard will increase costs for shelters. It absolutely will. And that's why I would argue that's why there's been a reluctance in the past to adopt that standard.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. I guess my last quick question is you gave some data on the by names list, but I keep seeing like the by names list as it stands now. Can we get a by names like a weekly? Can the next presentation talk about sort of the monthly or annual trends in the by names list so that we can start to see if it's flatlining, if it's going down on an annual and a monthly basis, and if we're seeing uptakes seasonally even? Like, I'd be curious about all of that to get a bigger picture of the landscape.
Yeah, so we certainly track that quite closely. By names list, occupancy, you name it. We're watching it every day. So we can work with you to figure out what the best format for that is.
Thank you. And also, as part of the Homeward Trust update, maybe Susan can provide that information to us as well, right? Okay, thank you. Councillor Stevenson?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, a heavy day for sure. And I'm wondering if administration has the number of deaths that have occurred in the past month.
So the challenge with those statistics is we would generally rely on Alberta Health Services. Depending on which way you are looking at that, there's different ways that data is collected and is reported. So it seems like it would be a very easy answer to give you, but unfortunately it's a little bit more complicated than that. And so our preference is to refer to the source organizations who hold that so that we don't misrepresent the picture.
But we do know absolutely that Edmontonians have died in the past month.
We absolutely do, Councillor. But again, we can't really, we don't have the capacity or the details to comment on causes of death, but we definitely know that homeless people who were in a houseless situation have died tragically this month for sure.
Thank you. So feeling the extreme sense of urgency around this and recognizing that it will take a month for this center to be set up, can I confirm which council meeting this is coming to in terms of a recommendation from committee? I know that we have a non-statutory public hearing on Monday, but I don't know if that allows us an opportunity to address this matter.
The next regularly scheduled city council meeting is December 5th.
Yeah, I think that calling a special meeting may be in order just so that we can expedite this if that's something administration feels is worthwhile.
Yeah, I would also say that depending on what I hear from committee today, if I hear that there's a recommendation from committee going forward, I think my plan was to proceed and take risk and move with all the things we need to do immediately if I hear the recommendations going forward by committee.
Okay.
Yes, I'll also note that we've noted 4 weeks in there. We do believe, given some of our conversations with the operator, that we may be able to phase some of those. So we will do everything under the sun possible to get the most number of spaces open as soon as possible.
Thank you. I appreciated the table that you shared in terms of showing the correlation between temperature and shelter usage. And I think, the other really strong takeaway that I have from those stats is that people will turn to shelters as a very last resort. Many people will choose shelters as a very last resort. And I think that really speaks to the importance of the minimum shelter standards. So again, appreciating the time and the urgency, but appreciate administration's commitment to making sure that this center upholds as many of those principles of the minimum shelter standards as possible. But apologies, could I Could I get further confirmation, Mr. Corbold? You mentioned that the 24/7 operations may be delayed?
I know that from a Government of Alberta perspective, they've got directives from the minister to go up to 24/7 at Hope Mission. I just can't confirm today when exactly that will be achieved in all the Government of Alberta funded shelters. We'll continue to track that, and we can report back to council in terms of where that is being applied and where it is not.
Okay. And then just clarification, because I think I heard two separate things. This funding would be for the next 6 months, so from now until May or June? Okay, but nothing for sort of winter starting next year?
No, this is a 6-month plan
Okay.
for emergency shelters in the winter. Yeah.
Okay, and in terms of the advocacy and ongoing conversation with our partners at the province, will there be a focus on potentially, you know, again, it takes a month to set it up, there are setup costs in terms of seeing that through the summer and winter?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that if we can get this set up and running and functioning in a positive way, especially on the minimum shelters, we could use it as, in some ways, a proof of concept of the minimum shelter standards that, you know, again, not being 100% achieved. And maybe there's also a time where we could move out of the congregate space aspect of this so that it is only the individual rooms. So I would say, if we can get this going, let's get success, and then it's a mechanism by which we can demonstrate, improve, and reinforce other success. Especially, I would say, with the part of this that is a collaboration with Tall Cree.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Councillor Principe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Corbold, for the $7.5 million consideration for Jasper Place Wellness Center, was that amount requested by Jasper Place, or was that suggested by administration?
That there was an initial proposal submitted by Jasper Place, which was not that number, and this number has been the result of about 7 to 10 days of back and forth and considering what the requirements are, what we wanted out of the proposal, and therefore what it would cost. So we feel strongly that administration really dug into the costs of this proposal, and we think that they're fair given what we're asking them to deliver.
Okay, yeah, $36,000 for one space for 6 months does seem like a lot of money to me. And I don't know like what exactly the services cost. And I don't know if council would ever see a breakdown of those costs, but would you, as the city manager, because I know that it has to be approved by you, would you see the break cost down, or the breakdown of the cost?
Absolutely, and those costs can and will be shared with council and the public as we move forward. I think that there's nothing that's not a challenge to do that, but and that's why I tried to articulate a bit of why those costs are the way they are, and it has a lot to do that, you know, you're setting all this up, but only for 6 months. If we were setting this up for 2 or 3 years, those costs, you know, a lot of the setup costs would be amortized over that period of time, which makes it more cost effective. Some of it is the speed at which we want to move. Some of it is the additional supports that move us to closer to the minimum standard in terms of 24/7 and the drop-in places and the all those surrounding supports around the shelter that are not provided in an $11,000 per bed space option.
Well, I think that would be really important for us to see that breakdown then, because if we can see the value in it, like in how much it's costing for us just to initiate this yearly, year after year after year, you know, I would like to see that breakdown, see how we can make better use of the money.
Yeah,
so
for
thank
sure.
you. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rice.
Thank you, Mayor Sohi. I just want to get some clarification for the emergency shelter by lumber. I have to speak louder. So, Mr. Coble, and from city administration operation perspective, do we have ongoing proactive approach and for the emergency shelter strategy? And then because we're facing this challenge, and then our Edmontonians and face this challenge as well, and every winter, and then do we have ongoing proactive strategy to address this instead of every winter we come back to discuss the same topic?
I guess, Councillor, I would answer that by saying yes, but noting that the provision of shelters is not the primary responsibility of the municipality. So by our proactive approach to this is to coordinate with our partners at the province. I think that proactive approach is what resulted in 450 spaces being added, but we constantly have discussions about the numbers that are required. But to be clear, the responsibility for providing shelter spaces is a provincial one, not a government one. So our proactive approach is to work with our partner. We collaborate quite well. We get lots of good positive responses to what our needs are, but we don't develop the 3-year plan. That is the jurisdiction of the province.
So then I have 2 follow-up questions. And the first one, and it's my understanding, and back to a few months ago, and the province actually announced the money and provided that support for the housing and shelters and for our municipal. So do you have that number handy? And then, so
correct. That is the number they announced on October 1st, which was to add 450 spaces to the shelter capacity. We have been discussing with them since that they're based on our named list, that won't be enough. But
so
it's a huge piece.
How much? Like I believe is like over $70 million, something like that. $75 million. Do you have that correct number?
No, I can get you that number, but it was $5 million.
Yeah. 5 million
for the emergency shelter, and it was an additional 12 million to bring parity between the Calgary Housing Foundation and Homeward Trust, which is our housing authority here in Edmonton.
So
and a good portion of the announcement that was made that got into the 70 millions was all the other stuff on mental health and addiction support, which is separate from
was total $7 million for shelters. Correct. $5 million for opening 450 beds and $2 million for 24/7.
Correct. Yeah. Thanks, Mayor.
So, and if that is the case, do we have a strategy specifically how we integrate the existing services and we already and then in place and into this emergency shelter requirements? And because that ongoing and existing services is already in place.
Yeah, I would say that what has been our strategy is to deal with the gap between what is in the plan and what is the reality every day on the street. And so that's what this is an example of is we're seeing the numbers of people we have in the street and trying to make sure there are places for them to be at night.
Okay, so I have some numbers I want to verify here. And based on by name list, and we have 2,650 homeless population. Is that correct? And then that's our current state. And then among this 2,650, we have 1,250, and then in living outdoor, and then emergency shelters.
Correct.
Okay, so then what's our existing emergency shelter capacity number here? What's the total number available?
So once the province completes the 450 spaces, the capacity will get to 1,072, and that is the gap between that and the 1,250 we need, which is what this proposal would do.
So fill that gap.
Exactly.
And then so in the timely manner. That is why this proposal come in. And specifically, I want to ask, I have 20 seconds, and then the high risk right now, in larger incumbent sites. And then I still say that specifically in Chinatown. And do we have specific approach and how we can ensure and those folks who need help on those sites and get into the shelter? And I really want to make sure that piece, and because we cannot force anybody to go there, but what's the strategy our city is planning to do for that?
Yeah, so the strategy is continued movement with the encampments, with our encampment teams, which are a combination of police, fire, social sector supports, peace officers, and we're adding a health element to that because of the Shigella virus.
Is there any policy support that?
I would say that council reviewed the encampment response strategy that we provided and the resources that are allocated to do that.
I can come back because
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Jans?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor. I'm just having trouble here with the math. So the proposal in front of us today is for 209 spaces. Is that correct?
Yes, Councillor.
And it seems like we're having a bit of conversation about how many unhoused people are still out there. I think the Homeward Trust list for November 21st said 813 are sleeping outdoors. Is that correct?
We feel that there are 1,250 people who I self-identified as sleeping in emergency shelters or outdoors.
Okay, so then 1,250 minus 209, we're still looking roughly at $1,000, or even less. And we know it's going to only get colder. So while certainly as far as this matter, yes, full support, go make it happen. Absolutely full support here from this councillor, but I'm still wondering what we can do with the other 800 to 1,000. I've heard, we've been closing the LRT stations, and certainly I understand why at the end of the night, but I understand folks are also breaking the doors trying to get in to get shelter. So I'm just wondering, what do we, what's sort of while we have this opportunity ahead of us now on this conversation, what other learnings have we had in the last 30 days, and what other opportunities are there?
Well, I would say that the transit safety plan I would highlight is a success because there are fewer and fewer people I think that have to be moved. What I want to make sure is before we're moving people out of encampments or transit that we have spaces for them to go. And if they decide not to go there, that is a human choice that they have every right to make. But I want to make sure, I think our role is to make sure that between us and our partners at the province, there are spaces for every one of those folks, which I think gives us then the ability to say, the transit station's not a safe place for you to be in. There is available shelters. If we don't have the available shelters, I think it's a very unfair process for us to be following through with our safety plans, which is why I think this is so important to our safety strategy.
Yeah, no, absolutely, full support. On the thread that Councillor Stevenson was asking, so we can't say, but Alberta Health Services can say how many people have died in tents?
Yeah, we're not the responsible authority for commenting on the deaths of people and the conditions and the causes of death. We just don't have that clarity. We've heard stories about some of this. Some of this we have actually responded to because in one or two cases, certainly our firefighters responded. But even though they're responding to the emergency call, they are not the appropriate spokesperson to comment on how many deaths and what conditions and what the causes of death were. That is absolutely a health responsibility.
Yeah, and how about for amputations and other health-related consequences?
Again, we don't have any, other than anecdotal, we have no data on that we would be responsible for reporting. I do believe that too would be health, but we could check on that.
Yeah. During the pandemic, we used to have the Chief Minister of Health, or I forget their name, but Alberta Health used to come to council. Maybe there's a chance we could have them back to talk about the consequences of homelessness in our city right now, and they could help provide some context here, because I really worry Edmontonians are not getting the full picture of the harm on our province right now, and the cruelty of this situation. So I'd appreciate an audience with them again if we could get them back to council. I forget, Chris Sikora, I think was his name.
Yeah, it's Dr. Sikora who I've been in touch with in the past week about Shigella and other things. So we can definitely plan on inviting him the next time we're giving an update on the emergency shelter situation.
Right. And last night, the premier announced $2.4 billion in the checks and subsidies, et cetera. There was something about low-income transit, but was there nothing about housing, nothing about emergency shelters, nothing about winter?
Other than food bank.
Yeah, I'm not for sure certain. I haven't gone through the transcript yet, so I'm sorry I can't confirm that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jans. So I'll move the recommendation in the report that attachment 1 be added to November 23rd, 2022 Community Services Verbal Report CS01603. Number 2, that the attachment 2 be added to the November 23rd, 2022 Community Services Verbal Report CS01603 and the actions within it approved, and that the Executive Committee recommended to City Council that the actions outlined in attachment 1 of the November 23rd, 2022 Community Services Verbal Report CS01603 be approved, and the attachment 1 is that the 2022 operating budget for the social service branch be increased by $7.5 million on a one-time basis spent over a multi-year period in the relations to bridge transition, housing and shelter spaces at 15540 Stony Plain Road with funding from the Financial Stabilization Reserve. And number 2, that the subsidy funding agreement between the City of Edmonton and Jasper Place Wellness Center up to a maximum of amount of $7.5 million as outlined attachment 2 be approved, that the agreement be in form and content acceptable to City Manager. Right? Okay. That's it, right? Okay. So we have motion on the floor. I do have some questions. Andre, it is frustrating. That frustration not at individuals, but frustration at the situation. That we are back in this again. We had the same situation last year. That we are scrambling at the last minute to find these spaces. I hope that with this support we get through this winter, and I think we really need to shift our conversation with among ourselves as a corporation, with community, but also with the province and the federal government about long-term solutions too.
Yeah, I would agree, Mayor, and I would say the solution lies in the province's own homelessness task force report. If we implement every one of the recommendations in that report, then I think we will get to a long-term solution.
Yeah, and I don't think we should wait. I think window of opportunity has been opened with the 2 new ministers, and they're willing to have this conversation, and also our visit to Ottawa last month, where we can have conversation on the federal role on urban indigenous issues and housing, right? So I think I think we have some components of the plan together. I think we need to just put it together in a more holistic way and start chipping away at that once we get through this.
Yeah, I agree, Mayor.
Okay, so we need to figure that part out, because it'll be shame if we are in the same situation come next winter. Right? I just breaks my heart and everyone's heart that we struggle with this, and that we can't support our most vulnerable people. Right? So it's just frustrating as well. Okay, Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Mayor. So a few more questions. Just to Councillor Jans's question, his first question, I want to make sure I'm correct though. These 209 spaces would ultimately get us to the point where everyone would have the opportunity to be in a warm space in the winter.
That's our understanding, Councillor, because that would make that, then we would have shelter space for all 1,250 people. And of course, we're watching that by names list, and if it grows or goes down, then we'll have to adjust, but that's our current target.
That's sort of the bait.
And I would say that it's and that's sometimes why there is a different perspective, I think the province does look at empty bed spaces at night. And I don't think that matters as much as making sure we have the spaces available for 1,250 people.
Well,
whether they use it every night, especially if it's a warmer night, doesn't matter. I would say it's got to be available.
Yeah, and so to that point, does the, I know we've been working over and due to a lot of good work from you and everyone involved and the mayor about trying to make sure they have a clear understanding of the numbers. Like they're very much looking at it as, oh, this is the number of beds, shelter spaces that aren't being used, therefore we have enough. We actually talk to people, and I don't mean to sound so blunt about it, but we actually talk to people and the shelter providers who are saying, and to the actual people experiencing houselessness who are telling us, I'm not going to these spaces because I don't feel safe. And so we have since shared that information with them, and they're starting to realize that it actually matters talking to the people who are experiencing houselessness, right?
Yeah, and I would say I don't think they're starting to realize it's important to talk to people. I think they talk to people as well, but I think it's important to know that we're making progress on that, because a year ago, the difference of perspective was probably closer to 800 people.
Yeah.
Now the difference of perspective is 209 people. That's a lot of progress, I would say.
Sure.
And we see that progress follow through with the addition of the 450 spaces by the province.
Okay. Now, again, the ultimate goal is all of those spaces are meant to be 24/7, but we don't know when they'll be. That's what I heard, correct?
Correct, but they have certainly got direction from their minister to get to that point, and we are making progress. We know for a fact that they've hired additional resources with that in mind, and they have targets, and we'll continue to work with them on that.
Okay. For the sort of health response around the Shigella outbreak, you mentioned we've got, we're trying to adjust how we respond to the individuals. Is the support for those individuals as we're responding, connecting with folks, trying to get them connected to shelter resources, or if we're finding they have health concerns, is there anyone from Alberta Health or Alberta Health Services as part of the teams that are doing the response, who are on our warming buses being able to respond? Are there any medical professionals from the province who are working with us when we're engaging these individuals?
Not as much as we would like. We have certainly spoke to AHS. They're certainly helping in terms of understanding the situation, working with us. We have asked, though, would it be possible, for example, to have a health-focused shelter that was set up by AHS to deal with homeless people who have Shigella, and they have clarified that they do not have the capacity to do that. So the best we can do right now, with great support from Boyle Macaulay Health, is to actually have, where possible, health people as part of the encampment teams and as part of the transit safety teams. But that can't be done 24/7 as well. But they're also helping us with training to do things. So we've had some assistance, but essentially they say that at the end of the day that if people are really hurt, they will be and have been treated by hospital, and we've seen that 66% of them have had to go to hospital. So
which is about a $1,500 a night stay in an emergency bed, I think, right now.
Yeah.
So in terms of resources, it's how they're choosing to deploy their resources, not that they don't have the resources right now. That would, sorry, that's
I think that's a question
not a
for
fair
them,
question for you to answer. Sorry, that
fair
was,
enough.
No,
Yeah.
that's not.
Yeah. But we have, and I spoke with the Deputy Minister of Health this morning to say that, we have this concern. We have asked for support.
Yeah.
We're told the capacity is not there at AHS. We understand that, and so we're doing the best we can with Boyle Macaulay Health.
Yeah. Oh, and thank you for how you're trying to fill that gap right now. It's and again, my frustration is not at all directed towards you right now. So. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jans. Councillor Tang, I'm just mindful of the time as well. Councillor Tang, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick follow-up to what Councillor Knack was saying in terms of the role of health. Recognizing there's a lot of challenges, and recognizing that we predominantly deal with community services and municipal affairs. Have we had sort of this conversation with the Minister of Health, and just how do we get there?
Yeah, I would say, Councillor, we're talking to health all the time. We've had lots of, they're part of the team that looks at these issues. They have been helpful with advice and things like that with Shigella and others. I've chatted with the Deputy Minister of Health 3 times in the last week on some of these issues. So they're at the table, but I also think that they have some capacity issues they're dealing with.
Right. Although the Ministry of Health is the big takes up the largest budget in the provincial budget overall. I think that has been the case for years. And I just want to just clarify on the 7.5. So it's split between 2022 and 2023. Is that right? Or is all of it coming out of the 2023 FSR?
I think it would have to be a split given the fiscal years, yeah.
Okay. And then that split is in the presentation, is that right?
I don't think we split it out into the 2 fiscal years, but we can do that for sure going forward before we go to council.
Okay. And then just so I can understand, after 6 months, program is done, funding is done, Jasper Place and Wellness rolls up the mat, and we start over again for next year. Just so I'm crystal clear on this. Is that right?
Well, that's what this would approve, but as I mentioned earlier, I hope that once we stand this place up, we can have a dialogue with Community and Social Services to talk about
long term.
Potentially the value of prolonging it further. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tang. Councillor Rice.
Yeah, I agree with Mayor Sohi, and for the long-term, focus on the long-term solutions. And then specifically right now, Mr. Kobo, you mentioned this. This is a provincial jurisdiction. But how that collaboration looks like, and if we are going to fill in this gap, and how this well received, and how we work with community service and the specific and program branch area. And did a new previous work already in place, and then when we move forward with this specific piece?
Yeah, Councillor, I mean, we work every day at almost every level. You know, I spoke with the Deputy Minister twice today, and I think one of the things, though, that we both agree we need to do between our teams together is, you know, how do we address this thing where we know there's people on the street at night, but then there's still 100 empty spaces. So how do we navigate the people to the empty spaces? So we're going to sort of, we agreed today that we need to collaborate on that a bit more to see how we can fill up all those spaces, because if we can consistently get to a place where there's 99% sort of capacity being used, then that really helps all of us to get more resources, right?
And for me to ask this question, because it's very frustrating here, the point here is we, 3-level government, we're facing the same service providers. And then this issue come back every year. And then how is that collaboration or integrated effort and to address this issue? And I didn't say that effort. I didn't say that's effective for that effort there. This is why I ask this question. And if we are all facing the same service provider, and why this issue come back every year? So how that integrated process and be in place to address this from long-term perspective?
My answer to that is we've had different policies between the city and the province on what the requirement is, what the minimum standard is, which is why last year I think one of the most positive steps was for council to establish a new minimum standard. Once, if and when the province adopts the exact same minimum standard as council has adopted in Edmonton, then I think we'll be able to collaborate a lot because we'll be working from the same policy directives. The reality is that is not the situation today.
Okay, thank you. I think that is key point, and really appreciate that point. And also I want, from financial capacity perspective, we do have constrained financial capacity, and from FSR. So this morning we talked about 5 million and for the Edmonton Age Fund, and this afternoon we talk about 7.5 million and from same funding source. And so right now we are facing So after those funding source approved, our FSR and is under below the limited is allowed. Is that?
Yes, correct. But as I mentioned, the plan would be when we were going to publish the report on the 2022 surplus this year, and I mentioned what the number would be at 67 million. That'll be published tomorrow in detail. Then council will have an opportunity to figure out how it wants to apply that surplus. And what we're suggesting here is that, you know, if we use FSR, we would use part of the surplus to make sure that's up above the minimum requirement in accordance with council policy, which would mean the surplus will end up being, you know, slightly lower than what we project tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay, so looking forward for that information.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Jans. Sorry, Councillor Stevenson.
Yes, thank you. You know, I just want to say, first of all, too, I really do appreciate the teams are counting and recording the number of people that are coming out of transit spaces every evening. I think those stats are very important, and so appreciate that that's being done. I just want to clarify my understanding of sort of our warming bus protocol. So at every time when we are, you know, closing down a station, is there transportation available? Is there a bus available there?
There's not necessarily a bus at every station we're closing down, and of course we start closing down at different times, but there is always navigation, direction, and sort of we're telling people how they get to a shelter or how they get to a station that might be one or two down the line, for example, that gets to the shelter. So there's not a bus at every station every time, but there is access to get to a shelter with a bus. And we don't have warming buses outside of all the transit stations, but we have them at key nodes. And I think Carrie Houghton McDonald could perhaps talk about that a bit more, because I believe she's online.
Yeah, sure thing. During extreme weather, we enhance that level of service, and we'll have the shuttle buses running in continuous loops, bringing people directly to the shelters. And then otherwise, we have trip plans developed and handouts and support for the TPOs to help people connect to bus service to get to the shelters anytime.
Thank you for that. And so just so I understand, so before -10, so if it's -5, do we have sort of what you were describing, Mr. Corbould, in terms of some buses at some stations, or nothing until we hit the -10?
Yeah, and it used to be -20 it would kick in. We've lowered that to, or I guess heightened it to -10. And a lot of that's just based on demand. We're open to other temperatures, but I think going from -20 to -10 is a big, huge step that we've just decided to take here since November 9th. I think we need to try that out for a bit. If there's still a need, we'll find a way to make it happen.
Okay, I really appreciate hearing that, and I, you know, do want to acknowledge. I think that shift from -20 to -10 is really important and a much more compassionate response, but and again, I think if we can continue potentially revisiting that, particularly recognizing that this location is going to be not in the core, and I recognize that there are folks in the area in the West End that do require those services, but just as well to ensure that folks in the downtown have an easy way to access that as well if they choose to go there.
But for sure, but also as Councillor Knack pointed out, like one of the stations that is quite active is that Jasper Transit Station. So you know, this facility is literally across the street from it, so it'll be helpful. Yeah.
Thank you. That was it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Jans.
Just wondering, what's the ask to everyday Edmontonians? I've heard questions about can community halls be rented and set up like small 4-bed sleepovers, or can faith organizations or faith spaces be, you know, they have washrooms and kitchens, many cases. Can they be rented? Like, are there, if we truly take an emergency lens, like a flood or active extreme weather or terror, what other options are ahead of us that can we pause encampment clearing for a few more weeks? I see that we paused it for the last 2 weeks. Can we, is there a role with CFB Edmonton? Is there a role with other partners? I'm just trying to open up any door here, and maybe we don't have an answer now, but I think I opened up my inbox this morning to over 300 emails about housing, and Edmontonians are getting frustrated with jurisdiction and looking to us for answers, and they bring me these creative solutions, and I have no idea what to say.
Yeah, well, Councillor, that's one of it's the exact reason that I mentioned the Al Rashid Mosque as a shining example in our city that stand up, organize, work with us, reached out to us, we reached back, we funded them to a degree as part of our base plans, and so and we're happy to do that with any group that we meet. I have in the past had these conversations with many of the faith-based leaders in the city who have been very supportive and do different things at different times. But that would be the message I would say: get organized and come and talk to us, and we'll work with you on solutions for sure. But you know, it's a shining example, the Al Rashid Mosque, at how they're standing up and doing this, and they always have. So.
Yeah. So who specifically should they reach out to? Just amarjeet.sohi@edmonton.ca. How do we proceed?
I would prefer our social development branch. So Stacey Gelatli at edmonton.ca, who is nodding.
Anyone is
happy to have those conversations.
And of course, any councillor, please funnel those emails towards Stacey and I, and we'll figure it out.
Any organization willing to help us is welcome to send me an email as well, right? So we need support.
And on the pausing the tent clearings, I saw we had them paused since November 9th. Is there the possibility to extend that?
So we had a long conversation. Part of the reason the pause was there was directly a result of Shigella. Had long conversations with Dr. Sikora and others. But we're also concerned about the safety issues and the deaths in some of the camps. And I've come to the conclusion from my perspective that if it's a case between, getting sick or dying, I think it's really important that we move on the camps, because they're not safe places to be, and get those people into shelters, notwithstanding some of the concerns with Shigella. So our strong advice at administration is to keep going with the encampments as we've planned to do. We've added a medical aspect to our encampment teams with Boyle Macaulay Health, and I think that's an important policy as part of our safety plan to continue. So that's what we're doing at this point.
So can I paraphrase for a sec? So I think what you're saying is the risk of contracting Shigella from lack of sanitation, et cetera, in the encampments exceeds that of getting it in the shelters. So the shelters are not they're not getting it from the shelters. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm not saying it can't be passed in a shelter, but in a shelter, there's a shower, there's washrooms, there's things. So the more hygiene that can be provided, the less chances of Shigella spreading. And that's the advice we're following. That's why we've added the additional washrooms. That's why we really like the idea of this new shelter having individual spaces where the operator could put people who have Shigella in different rooms and with a bathroom and a shower so that they can maintain hygiene. So what I'm saying is that because of the other threats of fire and death in encampments, I don't think that's something we should promote or extend as long as we can move people to shelters.
Right. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, Councillor Jans. Councillor Stevenson, you have a good question?
Yes, thank you. Just following from that, do we have policies in place in terms of encampment displacement at different weather thresholds and pending shelter capacity? So I guess what I'm asking is, do we take into consideration the dismantling of a camp if it is extremely low temperatures and we know that there's not capacity in shelter?
I absolutely believe we do, Councillor, and those calls are made, I think, really well on a day-to-day basis, hour-to-hour basis sometimes, and we do that all the time.
Great.
We're not going to blindly follow an encampment strategy if it doesn't make sense on a -30 at night.
Great. Thank you so much. Good to hear.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. So we have two-part motion. First part we need to deal with is the that attachment 1 and 2 be added to the November 23rd, 2022 Community Services Verbal Report. So please vote on adding those two attachments first. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Please vote.
So one question, point of order.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Rice.
So if we vote this one first, and this one will add it to the larger part of motion,
Yes.
and then so both together recommended to the council.
So this is to add the recommendation
Yeah.
to the report, to the agenda.
To
this, and once, so this is more procedural. Then next one will be the actual motion to allocate the money.
To council.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right, please vote.
We're just waiting on one vote. We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. And can you put the other motion on the?
Certainly, just give us one moment.
Please. Yeah. All right, here is the motion now that the executive committee recommend to council, and I already read that into the record. Do I need to read that again into the record?
Just because it is now on the floor, it'd be helpful.
Okay, that the 2022 operating budget for the social development branch be increased by $7.5 million on a one-time basis spent over a multi-year period in the relations to bridge transition housing and shelter spaces at 15540 Stony Plain Road with funding from the Financial Stabilization Reserve. And part 2, that the subsidy funding agreement between the City of Edmonton and Jasper Place Wellness Center up to a maximum amount of $7.5 million as outlined in attachment 2 of the Community Services Verbal Report CS01603 be approved, that the agreement be in form and content acceptable to the City Manager. Okay. We have a motion on the floor to speak.
Just,
sorry.
If I may,
Yeah.
Mayor, just we have clarified that we do believe we can get this on the 30th of November council meeting pre-budget, but we also want to specify that in the motion. So
We do have it loaded. It does say the bottom due date, November 30th, 2022, City Council. Oh, now it appeared. So it is fully loaded there.
Okay, so you'll be able to add this to November 30th, which is a regular non-stat?
That is correct. We've received confirmation.
Okay.
So just to clarify, Mr. Mayor, it will not be going to the non-stat, it'll be going to the November 30th regular council meeting, and we will make it time specific unless corrected by the city manager that this would be the first item that you would deal with before you get into your budget deliberation.
Okay, I got it. Okay, okay, got it. Okay, that works. Okay. All right. To speak, Councillor Rutherford.
Yeah, I won't take too much time, but I do think it's important to highlight that, again, you know, I really, really hope that while we're here today, that this isn't something that we see year over year again and again. I mean, I've only been here just over a year, and I've already seen this conversation coming up multiple times, and we seem very reactive instead of proactive when, like I said, I get some situational context has changed, but at the end of the day, we knew there was a deficit in beds going into this winter. We knew that. I think it's really important for Edmontonians to understand the financial source of this motion from our Financial Stabilization Reserve. I think it's absolutely appropriate to use it for this, but this is putting that Financial Stabilization Reserve at our minimum threshold. We as a city, as a municipality, only have so many levers that we can pull. We only have so many sources of revenue and funds in which we can draw for everything we need to run a city. And we as a city right now are basically spending our last dollars on this. We need the province to step up. We need the federal government to be partners with us. I am willing and able to work in any capacity with any other order of government to address this, but we cannot be a never-ending bankroll to address this systemic issue that is outside of our jurisdiction. The same way we wouldn't be addressing wait times in Alberta Health Services to get into emergency rooms. And it's hard to say, but it's absolutely frustrating that we are here, that we have asked, that there is an inequity and a disparity between Calgary and Edmonton that was not only foreseeable this year, but foreseeable for years and years and years. The data has not just emerged recently. We've had this data for a long time. I begrudgingly hate that this is a MAP program. I hate that aspect of this. Everything in my being knows that while I get the point that having any shelter space is better than not offering a shelter space at all, I believe in dignity and human-centered approaches, and this is the farthest thing from that. And so as we go forward as a city, as a council, as collaborative partners with other orders of government, we need to be firm in our advocacy on the need to do this in a dignified way and to highlight both the short-term need and how do we get that going down. How do we take that number that is $1,250 and next year when we're having this conversation, it's 1,000, and the year after that, it's 800. How are we actually seeing that number decrease over time? Because right now, that's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that we're not, we've kind of stabilized. Since the pandemic, we had a huge spike and we've stabilized, but we're not seeing that number go down. And so that has to be a part of the question. And, I know we're not in budget debates, but it weighs heavy on my mind that there is $0 funded in our capital or operating budget. They're all unfunded for housing. And so I hope that this also reminds any decision maker at this table of the urgency that we need to figure out where to find that money and fund those pieces as well. Because without the universal right to housing and having housing available for people that is safe, affordable, and appropriate, we are going to continue to see those numbers either stay as they are today or continue to increase. And something has to change. So I will absolutely support this motion today, but I really, I ask administration, I ask my colleagues, I ask other orders of government, any way that we can work together to make sure we're not continually here again, I'm all in. Tell me what I need to do, because this cannot keep happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. Councillor Knack.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'll obviously be supporting this because, frankly, we have to support it right now. Not filling this gap is just going to result in more of our neighbors dying unnecessarily. And to a lot of what Councillor Rutherford just talked about, this is what we've been dealing with now for years. Like, it is it's a tiring conversation. And I mean, we'll keep doing what we need to do as a city. Yeah, it's not our jurisdiction, but doing what's right to try to help ensure people aren't going to die is something that, that's what we do when we need to do it. What is still frustrating, and I appreciate, we've got some new ministers, we've got a new premier, and I want to give them the benefit of the doubt, but it's not like those people, most of them haven't been around for the last 4 years in government. They've been at the cabinet table. Where are... And like just yesterday, we had, the premier announced $2.4 billion in financial relief to Albertans who are dealing with higher costs of living, which, don't get me wrong, is important. But here we are, they're disputing us on $7.5 million just to do what's right, to ensure people have a warm place to go. And again, it's been happening year after year after year, and I cannot understand it. And like the fact that Al Rashid Mosque and thank goodness they're stepping up. But why do they have to step up? Again, where's the order of government who is responsible to ensure the lives, the safety, and the well-being of every Albertan, not just those of us who have homes? So yet again, we'll do what we need to do, because that's what we do at the city. That's what Edmontonians do. It's the right thing to do. Specific to this proposal, it's important that we have it in the West End, so I want to thank city staff for the excellent work. I want to thank Jasper Place Wellness for coming up with a plan in partnership with us and with others. Because I've heard it, I know that Jasper Place Transit Center right now has been essentially a shelter for much of this winter. And the folks living around, and I don't live too far away, I'm about 10 blocks away myself. But I know that many of the individuals don't feel safe going to other shelters. They don't want to leave the community that they have formed in the West End for a variety of reasons. And so I think it's great that we'll have this. It's great that it's essentially right across the street from Jasper Place Transit Center. I think this is going to be really important to fill that gap. And so I'm really thankful that this will be advanced. And just last night I was at a community AGM in Terralosa. And Terralosa is primarily made up of a community of seniors, and this was the theme that we talked about. The whole basis of the AGM was around how we were going to help our neighbors who were living in the parks and the tree stands in their community and all of the other West End communities. And so we talked about some of the things we're going to take action on, and I talked to them about what we need their help with, that advocacy that we need, because we just need more and more voices speaking up to the order of government who can ultimately solve this. And to Councillor Rutherford's point, we need to do what we'll continue to do our part this budget. We need to fund the housing asks in partnership with the federal government, and ideally in partnership with the provincial government. And we've said it over and over and over again, but we'll say it one more time in the next 40 seconds here, which is that beyond it just being the humane thing to do, the right thing to do to actually build the units of housing that we need, the province will literally save so much money by just providing everyone with a home. Not a shelter bed, not a mat on a floor, a home. And if they just did that, and if they used a fraction of their $13 billion surplus, every person in this province could have a home within about a year, if they wanted to. It's a choice they've made. And let's hope that this new group finally decides to make a different choice.
Thank you, Councillor Knapp. Councillor Stevenson.
Yes, thank you. Thanks to my colleagues for their words. You know, we're talking a lot about budget and the cost of different things, and I think what we've really seen in the past month is the cost of inaction. The cost of inaction when it comes to lives, when it comes to limbs, when it comes to dignity, when it comes to the safety of all of our community. I have videos of terrifying fires that are happening. This isn't working for any Edmontonian, it's impacting all of us. I'm pleased that we are recommending to move forward at this point. I also appreciate administration for the immediate changes that they've responded with in terms of washrooms and hygiene facilities. Shifting to a -10 degree activation is also very positive, and I hope we continue pushing on that. And that we continue to be responsive in how we deploy our ETS resources. Thank you also to the community members, to Al Rashid and others who have shown leadership in the community. I hope that we continue seeing that type of leadership from everyone and everyone in positions of power that can affect the change that we need to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stevenson. Anyone else to speak? Councillor Rice, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
So, yes, what we're doing today actually really sends a message to our Edmontonians. We care about our people. We care about our community. And we tried our best, and with the limited constraint, financial capacity, and to do this. I agree with all the points my colleagues and Mayor Sohi mentioned, but I do want to add one point. And for all the efforts we put together, and then how about our effort focus on the root cause? Because we can come back every year to have same conversation. But how about the root cause? And then we can find the solution, the way really address that and actually really help people who need help. So I believe I heard many are Edmontonians, and we want help. But the help, the effort, and the services, I believe, no matter is provincial government, is our city government, we both put our best there, our best effort here. But the issue still exists. Why is that? And why we come back every year and dealing with the same issue and without effective outcomes? I think that is something we really need to focus on. And then we don't need to come back every year to have the same conversation. So that dealing with root cause, and then that is the long-term sustainable approach we could, and from financial perspective, and also from how we really caring about the people and our community perspective. I just want to add that one point there, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. I want to start by thanking all the frontline workers who have been helping Edmonton's most struggling and vulnerable people over the last number of years. It's been tough on them. It's been not only they see pain and trauma being experienced by their fellow Edmontonians, but they have on their own been struggling with their own mental health and working through these tough times. So really commend their compassion and dedication to building a better Edmonton. I also want to thank my colleagues for having heart and compassion and trying to figure out what we need to do together to play our role in helping deal with this crisis of houselessness, mental health, addictions, and intergenerational trauma that our fellow Edmontonians experience. It's been difficult sometimes, but I think we are trying to figure out. We're all trying to figure this out. I also want to thank our administration for seeking solutions and thinking different ways of tackling this issue. So really appreciate that. I don't want to be here next year having this conversation. If we are having this conversation next year, I think it will be very disappointing. To us, it'll be disappointing to Edmontonians, but most importantly, it'll be devastating to the people that need help. We need to shift our thinking from shelters to more permanent bridge housing options, transitional housing options, permanent supportive housing options with wraparound services. I think that's where the solutions lie. I know that it's a very complex problem, and we've been working hard to bring our province along. I think they're coming along, and we will continue to work with them to engage in these permanent, sustainable solutions. I think there's a realization that we can't go back to the same situation every year, and ministers are recognizing that. So this is an opportunity for us to have those conversations with them as well, right? So we look forward to their partnership. We owe it to Edmontonians. If maybe a positive story I can share, and Susan knows about this, Susan McGee from Homeward Trust, because I told this story a number of times, how housing is so powerful in changing people's lives. I remember this a young mother of 3 kids who reached out to my office when I was a city councilor. She was just about to be kicked out of a shelter, and she would have been homeless with her 3 kids. She reached out, and through a great group of agencies in the city, we were able to connect her to services, and the agencies were able to connect her to housing, and she was able to find a proper place to live for herself and her kids. And within 1 year, she was able to change her life. She was living a stable life. Her kids were back in school, and she was on the way to having a good life. So that is the power of housing. That is the power of community. That is the power of when we come together and lift each other up. And I want to be in that position, soon, not late, right? I hope that we will be in a better position next year. So I look forward to having this report go to council with the support of the committee and having that discussion there. And with that, I'll call the vote.
We're just getting it loaded. We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. That is carried. Okay, so we are at 3:12. Yeah, I was just thinking we would need half an hour to hear from speakers on 7.4, and we are scheduled till 5, and that gives us 1 hour and 15 minutes to conclude item 7.2, and we also have 7.3, and we may not even get to 7.3, which is the Homeward Trust Edmonton 2022 City of Edmonton subsidy. Is that approval required for subsidy to continue, or can that come back at a next executive committee? Okay, actually, you know what? There are no questions other than subsequent. You have questions? No, I can just. So, Councillor Stevenson has a subsequent. We will deal with subsequent later. Yeah, you do have questions. Okay, okay, okay. Let's wait. You have many questions. Okay, can you, in the meantime, if staff could work with Susan McGee to figure out if there's a way to bring that back to the next
Certainly.
meeting? Okay.
Yeah.
Then we'll bring it forward and move it off the schedule. Okay. I'm so sorry to the folks from Edmonton Unlimited, but if you please be patient. What I would like to do is only have 15 minutes. I would like to hear from the members of public on the other item first. Is that okay? People are nodding heads. Okay, good. So if somebody could move to bring forward. So what we will do, we'll hear from members of the public on 7.4 climate and resilience mitigation. We will only hear and ask questions, then we'll come back to Edmonton Unlimited report. Okay? It's a little weird. Okay.
So moved.
Okay, so to bring forward 7.4, please vote.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. We're just getting the vote loaded. To confirm, was that Councillor Rutherford that moved that? Thank you.
Yes.
We have all the votes.
Display the votes, please. All right, that is carried. Okay, we are on to 7.4. Is there a presentation from administration, please?
There is. Sorry, I thought we went just straight to speakers. If you could just give me one moment to load the presentation and get my team. My apologies, I'm good to go now. So I believe Chandra Tamaris, our Director of Planning and Environment Services, is online, as well as Daniel Kowalek, our Acting General Supervisor, and Kent Schneider. So here today we're here to provide committee on an update of our climate resilience adaptation strategy. It's really a very important city building initiative that will shape our city and the way our city is built for time, over much time. This is a very complex topic, and the science and the work by the city, as well as community partners and other levels of government, is rapidly evolving. And the city has approached this work with a learning mindset, learning from global and local experts and translating that learning so we can take action. And although we're still in some initial phases, we've got some really important work underway. I want to highlight one, the EPCOR flood mitigation efforts, which were nationally recognized as Canada's 2021 Clean 50 Top Project Award for the Stormwater Integrated Resource Plan. The Clean 50 Annually Award recognizes Canada's leaders in sustainability for projects based on innovation and their ability to inspire and inform. Secondly, our EPCOR's flood mitigation plan won national recognition. This plan actually requires less capital investment and delivers faster results than traditional engineering approaches. Introduced in 2019, the plan has led Edmonton to receiving national awards with the Intact Centre on Climate Adaptation, now ranking Edmonton's first among 16 municipalities for the quality of its plans to limit the risk of flooding. Furthermore, there was a study conducted by the Intact Centre on the Climate Adaptation that found that Edmonton has the best flood preparedness in Canada. Of the 16 studied cities, only Edmonton reported significant strength in this important domain of flood preparedness. So we've been doing a lot of work. We're working with a lot of partners on this, and perhaps instead of doing the presentation, I'll end it there, and we can get into more of the details of the presentation through Q&A. So I'll hand it over to the speakers now who are registered to speak in the interest of time.
Thank you so much. Where's my list? Here we go. Okay, I'm going to call the names. Stephen Wong, in person? Stephen?
Yeah, online.
Online, okay. Juliana Weber, come on please. You'll be number 2 speaker. Jay Froes? Jay Froes, here you go. Nice to see you both. Again, you were here with us a couple of months ago, right? Nice to see you again. Then we have Dolly Spada Montefiore in person. Please, you'll be number 4. And Melanie Hoffman joining
online
virtually. Melanie, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
All right. We will start with Stephen. Each of you will have 5 minutes. And once your presentations are concluded, committee or council members may have questions to you. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Stephen Wong, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Alberta in civil and environmental engineering. My expertise is in transportation engineering, human behavior, and resilience, and I'm the leader of the Resilient and Sustainable Mobility and Evacuation Group, also known as RESUME. I first want to commend the executive committee and all the staff who have worked tirelessly to shape a climate resilient future for Edmonton. Through new prioritization and dedicated funding, I believe Edmonton can become a global exemplar for mitigation and adaptation that works for all people. In my research and living in many places, I've come to understand and experience climate change firsthand. I've seen the devastation of hurricanes on communities, heard the harrowing stories of wildfire evacuees, and witnessed the apocalyptic orange glow from wildfire smoke mixed with fog and sun. The momentum to adapt to climate change cannot stop, and funding for this capital budget cycle is critical for Edmonton's future. Priority projects in goals 2, 3, and 7 related to resilient infrastructure, resilience hubs, and river ravine flood protection are especially important in the near term. The need to adapt extends to transportation systems. Transportation is vital to saving lives in disasters, distributing relief supplies, and ensuring long-term economic continuity. Just as important, transportation goes beyond physical needs, enables people to connect, and strengthen social ties. We need climate-ready and safe transportation systems with infrastructure and operations that are designed for our climate future, not our current status. to be able to handle any disruption. Transport must also deal with two sides of the same climate coin, sustainability and resilience. For example, low-density cities make it harder for transportation to be energy efficient and responsive to disruptions. High-density, compact urban forms enable more sustainable transportation modes while making it easier for all people to reach resources in emergencies. I'm encouraged to see the city's commitment to smart growth strategies, including its exploration into the 15-minute city concept. Significant work still needs to be done to prepare our transportation systems for an unpredictable future. Our research at the Resume Group here at the U of A is dedicated to providing applicable and science-based knowledge that can help decision makers like yourself. One unique study we are conducting in partnership with the City of Edmonton and the Alberta Eco Trust Foundation is on the topic of resilience hubs and evacuation planning in Edmonton. Resilience hubs are designed to provide emergency shelter in a disaster and provide services and education during normal days. They can help facilitate social cohesion, promote climate resilience learning, and store critical supplies. Resilience hubs are promising, but untested, so our research helps fill this gap. Our other applied research is focused on guiding evacuation planning to a variety of hazards by understanding behavior and perceptions. This allows us to recommend specific transportation strategies that can save lives in a disaster. Concurrently, our group is working to bolster infrastructure planning for wildfires, while also identifying the benefits and problems with electric vehicles in emergencies. Operationally, we're also working on building resilient public transit plans to increase equitable outcomes in disasters. Research on climate mitigation and adaptation is a key priority at the U of A's Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. A diverse number of topics are being studied, from urban flooding to winter weather management to climate stresses on water resources. Simultaneously, new research is being produced to make our infrastructure and construction processes more sustainable and resilient. In my role as a professor, I also see students from diverse backgrounds coming together to discuss and problem solve these challenging issues. Finally, there exists significant opportunities for collaborations that can fund this applied research. Through the U of A's support and expertise, we can provide capacity building and knowledge translation on a range of needs, equipping the city to act and adapt to climate. Most importantly, this knowledge partnership can directly train the next generation of thought leaders. With matching funding available from provincial and federal sources and eager students, the timing is right. After all, the infrastructure choices we make today will stay with us for the next 75 to 100 years. I look forward to the city's funding on these important priorities in the next capital cycle and continuing to partner with the City of Edmonton moving forward. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Next, we go to Juliana Weber. Nice to see you again.
Hi. Thank you for having me today. My name is Juliana Weber, and I am a member of Edmonton Youth for Climate. I'm concerned with our city's current ability to cope with climate change. Climate change is here, it is happening now, and it will be worse in the future. Due to our latitude and being in a richer country, most of us in Edmonton have been able to go on with our days without noticing the impacts a changing climate is already having on our city. This is not the case for much of the world, especially in the global south and poorer areas where they do not have the luxury of pretending everything is all right, as droughts impact food and water supplies, heat waves kill, and floods decimate communities. We must take these impacts as the warning sign that they are and begin to prepare our city for the changes that are coming and make sure to prioritize vulnerable and marginalized communities as we do so. This looks like further investing in research of our water supply, building resilient communities and climate change resilient hubs, and protecting our green spaces. As summers are expected to get hotter and drier, and multi-year droughts are expected to become more common, it is essential that we have a clearer understanding of how this will affect the flow of the North Saskatchewan River and the water supply for the city. The 2021 YRCA book, Dry, by Neil Schusterman, is a novel about what happens in California when they run out of water. People panicked, and the area was unprepared to deal with the consequences of this disappearance of accessible water. Now, I know that Edmonton is hopefully far away from this kind of crisis situation, but reading it was scary because I knew that with climate change, this would maybe happen one day for a lot of people. and that maybe it would happen here in Edmonton eventually, and we would face these type of crisis decisions too. Understanding what the impacts of climate change will be on our water can help us prepare and brace for times when our river isn't as constant. Climate change impacts will be felt more intensely by marginalized and vulnerable people, and that is why it is important to build community capacity and climate change resilience hubs. Our summers are already getting hotter. This past summer, I roasted. Being outside was almost intolerable sometimes, and I felt tired, grumpy, and sweaty. But I was fortunate enough to have a basement to retreat to when it got too hot, which is something that a lot of people don't have. This is why we need to create places for people to go when it is too hot, where they can cool down or get a drink of water. Vulnerable populations like houseless people or elderly folks or young people shouldn't have to suffer in the heat. Looking after our natural spaces goes hand in hand with becoming climate resilient, because it both helps to mitigate and reduce the impacts climate change can cause. Plants can help prevent erosion and slow water flow. Trees can provide shade. Reading the attachments for this meeting, I felt such grief because in just 20 years, our current ecosystem could be totally different. It will likely be too hot to support the beautiful trees we have now, instead becoming a grassland. And that sucks, but it is also the reality that we are facing because of the world's inability to act on climate change. These natural spaces need to be protected, extended, maintained, and celebrated while they exist, and research and protection needs to continue as they change. The city has made important strides in considering climate change impacts in the future and planning for adaptation to these changes, and we need to keep doing so. Investing in the research of our current water supply is important so that we can be more aware of how climate change will impact our river. We need to make sure that infrastructure is prepared for an unstable climate and that we center on protecting vulnerable people in planning. Our natural ecosystem must be protected. We can do this, and we need to fund it now. My generation needs all the help that we can get when it comes to the climate crisis. And a big part of that is making sure that we have the systems and buildings in place before it is too bad for us to deal with. The city can and must invest in climate adaptation. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Next we go to Jay Frost. Actually, you know what? Just hold on. We're going to take a break. Sorry. We'll come back to you. Yeah. We'll be back at 3:45. is here, Councillor Rutherford is here, Councillor Stevenson is here. Councillor Rice will be joining us shortly. And check the, oops, what happened here? All right, we'll go back to our speaker list of speakers, and we were going to hear from Jay Frost.
Good afternoon, City Council. Thanks to decades of inaction on behalf of governments and leaders all over the world, we are now facing the harsh reality of climate change. We are forced to adapt and make our communities more resilient, in addition to mitigating climate change. This means we are spending money on immediate concerns like flood control, water security, and weather-resilient buildings, instead of on long-term projects. Youth need Edmonton to make climate a priority and act on their priorities. We tend to lose focus on the future when we are preoccupied about the present, but the world I will live in is being shaped by the decisions we make today, and we need these decisions to be thorough, just, and forward-thinking. This is why prioritizing is very important moving forward. In the attached documents, some focuses and ideas stood out to me, things that we need to see as we adapt to our changing world and climate. Out of the 2023 to 2026 priority projects, goals 2, 6, and 10 stood out to me. Priority Projects Goal 2 ensures that Edmonton is designed to be climate resilient today and for future Edmontonians. It's evident that designing the city made up of 15-minute communities, promoting sustainable and efficient transportation is essential to meeting emission reduction targets, while reducing urban sprawl, facilitating resilient buildings, and promoting equality. Goal 10, featuring conservation of Edmonton's natural ecosystems, is also extremely valuable. Edmonton's river valleys, parks, and ravines are one of the key features of our city, and we need to maintain them. In addition to providing services such as clean air and a habitat for hundreds of species, including endangered migrating warblers, they are critical climate solutions. Heat maps show that more densely treed areas are cooler in the summer, necessary for managing temperature in our city during increasingly hot summer months. By ensuring the stability of our river valleys, they in turn help protect against erosion and flooding, a natural solution to Goal 7, ensuring that Edmonton is a flood-resilient community, and Goal 6, guaranteeing water security for all Edmontonians. Water is life, and we can't live without it. We need to ensure that our city is designed with equality, making sure that no communities experience disproportionate effects of flooding, heat domes, and other climate-related difficulties. Page 6 of the report commits to incorporating GBA Plus in climate adaptation and climate mitigation work. But these are just words on paper. Low-income and marginalized communities are already facing disproportionate effects of climate change, and they need to be at the forefront of all decisions and actions made. We will hold you accountable. You need to act. The city has taken steps that can guide us to a sustainable and livable future, like the carbon budget and energy transition strategy. But it isn't enough. You need to act. Edmonton is warming at one of the fastest rates in the world, and we will experience severe temperatures and weather events, impacting our way of life and health. In 2019, the City Council declared a climate emergency, but the level of climate action we have seen does not correspond with this bold and clear statement. We need more action. We need a sustainable city design. We need Edmonton's natural ecosystems. We need water security and flood control. We need equality. And I expect to see all these priorities funded at the budget discussions next week. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we will go to Dolly Spada Montefiore.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
So, hello. Hi, everyone. So, yes, my name is Dolly Spada Montefiore. I am a member of the Energy Transition and Climate Resilience Committee, as well as the Climate Resilience Projects Lead for the World Economic Forum's Edmonton Global Shapers Hub. So I'm in strong support of the Climate and Resiliency Mitigation Report and in its funding, its projects for the upcoming 2023-2026 budget, especially given Edmonton's climate emergency declaration A declaration which, frankly, if we don't act on it, should be reconsidered if the budget does not actually fund these projects. My top 3 reasons for supporting and urging you to fund the projects within this report are that, first of all, climate change is already here, and most costs are incurred privately. As mentioned in Attachment 1, Edmonton has been warming at one of the fastest rates in the world, and the administration has done a terrific job illuminating a path forward for Edmonton to adapt to changing temperatures, precipitation, extreme weather events, and changing ecosystems. The effects for climate inaction are already here. Our province emits 62.4 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions per person, more than double the emissions of Saudi Arabia's per capita emissions at 16.85 tons. When I first immigrated to Canada, it was a rarity to experience plus 30 weather. It was rare to have a fire that we hear about, and now that's just, we have a heat wave every year, and we have a fire season every year. So it's something that is happening, and there was a study by Energy Rates that found that the rate of air conditioning owners increased in Edmonton by 44% from 2009 to 2019. So climate is changing, and we need to shift the adaptation from a personal level to a city level. Number 2 is that adaptation projects are wanted by Edmontonians and bring us an opportunity to create a more equitable place. 75% of 1,000 respondents agreed that we need to take action now on climate, and this report brings us a path that addresses environmental racism by incorporating a lens that looks at how marginalized groups will experience climate change differently. Funding these projects also means the opportunity to create green jobs in the city. I was a 2021 Student Energy Fellow, and I'm currently in the Student Energy Early Career Training cohort, and I really want to stay in Edmonton. I don't want to have to move to Vancouver or Toronto to have a job in climate resilience, and with this kind of funding, we can ensure that young people like me, young people like us, have jobs here in Edmonton in things that we're passionate about. The last one is that if we don't invest in adaptation now, we're delaying the inevitable and having an inflated budget in adaptation. The yearly cost of inaction by 2050 will be $1 billion, in addition to climate-related loss of $2.1 billion in GDP annually, a cost that you don't have to burden onto my generation by investing now in adaptation measures that will save at the very least $13 per dollar invested. I implore you to not kick this can down the road and make the problem for Edmonton City Council for 2045 to deal with. We can really deal with this now, so please save us money and save our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Now we will go to Melanie Hoffman.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak at Executive Committee today. I'm getting an echo, I hope you aren't. I am also a new member of the Energy Transition and Climate Resilience Committee and would like to thank Council for your trust in my ability as a chemist and educator with broad expertise in climate communication and climate solutions to advise Council from a climate lens with this committee. Energy Transition and Climate Resilience Committee deeply appreciates the committed work of the city's urban planning and economy division. This team really understands the emergency we are in and is doing great work in providing information and opportunities to address the climate and nature emergencies. Unfortunately, budget processes have, in our minds, inexplicably led to this work being largely unfunded in the budget proposal. I'm here today also to support the climate and resiliency mitigation priority projects. It is imperative, as Dolly emphasized, that Council fund this work in the 2023 to 26 budget, lest it revoke the Edmonton Declaration and the declaration of a climate emergency. I'd like to thank Urban Planning and Economy for defining the terms mitigation and adaptation. In this report discussed today, we are not looking at ways to, in the words of Councillor Paquette used in the summer, swim away from the edge of the waterfall. What we are looking at in this report today instead is simply what we want to take through the rapids with us and over the waterfall. We're already in rapid waters, as you've been hearing. This report outlines what the proverbial oxygen tanks and flotation devices are that the City of Edmonton can deploy to help Edmontonians on this journey through the rapids. And I ask you to consider who the most vulnerable Edmontonians are in these contexts. Climate impacts are inequitably felt, even in a city as relatively untouched by climate change as Edmonton. And as members of 2D6, we have a kinship responsibility to our Indigenous brothers and sisters who are disproportionately present in these most vulnerable groups. Climate adaptation, on the other hand, done right, improves community well-being, community safety, and housing affordability. Support the necessary culture shift within administration. We declared a climate emergency 3 years ago, and yet the budget process fails to address climate, exemplifying how processes within administration, as mentioned in today's report, are just beginning to integrate climate science and climate resilience. Please engage with administration and provide what they need to mount an appropriate emergency response immediately. What is it going to mean to not fund these priority projects? It means not acting. It means knowingly and willingly letting people proverbially drown. Currently, neither swimming away from the waterfall's edge nor preparing for the ride are funded in the 23 to 26 budget proposal. And attachment 3 unfortunately doesn't make it clear which budget packages these priority projects are part of. So I'd like to encourage Executive Committee to ask for clear direction from administration on how these priority projects are present in budget deliberations. Providing this funding is an investment that will pay off, as Dolly outlined and quoted from the report. Now, speaking as myself, while all items in this report are imperative as priorities, I want to specifically highlight the power and importance of goal number 3, community climate social resilience programs and resilience hubs in our communities. Edmontonians deserve more access to climate resilience and climate solutions engagement. I commend the city for working on bringing together Change for Climate and Abundant Communities Edmonton to already collaborate on community resilience resources. Councillors, please strengthen both your own education and outreach efforts and those of administration. Leverage schools as community learning and engagement hubs and integrate and engage them in the Resilience Hub development process. Schools need retrofits, so create an opportunity to leverage provincial funding. We're all tired, we're all stretched. Work in climate adaptation, especially that focused on community and relationship building, is fundamentally regenerative. It is what we all need. Please accept this report and ensure over the next month that these priority actions are funded in the upcoming budget. Thank you so much for your work.
Thank you so much for your presentations and sharing your insights and thoughts with us. I'm pretty sure this council is going to work hard to prioritize taking action on climate change during the budget process. And thank you for reminding us of that as well. Questions, colleagues? Okay. I don't see the screen if there's. Okay. Okay, Councillor Rutherford, go ahead.
Yeah, this is interesting because this one was one I've been waiting for a while. I'm really passionate about the return on investment when it comes to climate mitigation. Now, in the report, it talks about how essentially there's no money. That's what the report says. It's summary. And we're going to try to find that money. But there's a tension, and I shorted up the other day too, between climate action in terms of carbon reduction and climate adaptation in terms of mitigation for what we know will be inevitable emergencies. And I'm even more acutely aware of foreseeing the issue and then having that be right in front of us, as was the item that was just before us today, prior to this conversation. So I guess my question is, how would you, if you were in our seats, and I'm going to ask the two youth leaders, if you were at these seats and you were making budget decisions, how would you navigate that tension between the carbon transition and energy transition and investing in mitigation? If you only had, let's say, $100 to allocate, what would that look like to you?
I can start, I guess. So I think probably the most important thing for me is the mitigation of it. We need to be doing the adaptation, and that's a really important part of it. But if we aren't mitigating it, if we aren't slowing down these impacts, they're just going to get worse, and we're going to have to adapt to more of it. It's also like an equity piece, because our continued emission of carbon emissions and like not trying to focus on that will impact people around the world worse, and that's really bad. If we adapt, like we have to do that because there's a certain amount of warming that we can't stop, and it's happening, and it's here. But I guess if I was doing like a percentage, I'd probably do 70% like mitigation and 30% adaptation. But also, I'm not like a super expert on this.
I know.
So.
I'm not going to say, you know, they said 70-30. We can't. No. That's not why I'm asking. I was just curious. And what do you say to Edmontonians that feel like, so from what I'm hearing, first of all, let's back up. Mitigation for you is that carbon reduction. That's what mitigation means to you. What do you say to Edmontonians who email myself and likely other counselors and say, effort and investment in climate mitigation is futile because we're so small in the big system?
Well, I think that it's important to realize that municipalities are pretty effective at dealing, with issues like this, because like there's so many of us. There's so many, cities all around the country and all around the world, and so every little bit counts, and every action leads to another. So if Edmonton starts to invest and fund these climate solutions, it can lead to other cities who, see us as a role model. And I really do believe that Edmonton can become a role model in terms of like climate action and all that really great stuff for other communities and cities all over the country and province.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I don't have any further questions. I think echo the same things that the mayor said. Like, I know for sure I've already got some amendments planned related to, especially adaptation is where I'm focusing, but also supporting mitigation, absolutely. However, I just want to say thank you. I didn't know how much I needed that youthful energy to transition me mentally and emotionally. So thank you for being here and taking the time and sharing your passion with us on council. And even though you're not experts, I think you're right. You're the biggest stakeholders in what we decide today, and we'll have to carry that burden in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. On the role of municipalities, we are doing a lot of work on intensifying communities that directly goes to reducing emissions and creating more livable communities. We also have a goal of shifting our modes of transportation from single occupancy vehicles to more sustainable modes of transportation. So there are work being done on flood mitigation by EPCOR, for example, or nature-based solutions to dealing with some of the flooding issues. So there's work being done, but you want to build on that, right? You want to build and expand on that. That's what you call. Okay, good. I do have a specific question to Dolly. I was at COP27, and one of the takeaways from that conference was understanding the intersectionality of these issues. How does climate change impact poor people? You talked about environmental racism. The inequities between nations, for example, I just want you to build on that a little bit more. Like I'm still trying to grapple that, right? How do we connect these different dots, that we take action that is kind of holistic, that touches on all of those issues that we're trying to tackle?
Sure. So at a city level, it's simple things like adaptation money. So say we have money for tree lining the streets, and my neighborhood is tree lined, but I'm sure there's a lot of neighborhoods in lower socioeconomic areas that aren't tree lined. And that is it's one of the ways that we can see environmental racism in our cities, because tree lining means that we don't have shade in the summer. Tree lining means that when there's a lot of floods, those are the areas that are gonna not be able to absorb as much water because there's no trees and there's no grass that gets that. And also it's gonna have more ice because of the same reasons in the springtime. At the larger level, I agree with you. It's per capita, Canada is the worst emitter in all of the world. We're number one and within the top 10 per capita, which is crazy to think about because we're such a small population, but to me, I see that and I look at global South countries, and those are the ones that are experiencing really bad famines, like in Somalia, and I understand that it's kind of hard, especially like, listening to like, why should we do something as a city? Our global percentage of people who are living in cities is increasing every single year. Currently, I think it's sitting at around 60%. So it's something that we have the biggest action and biggest capability of creating change, because it's not like the carbon that is emitted in Edmonton stays in Edmonton. There's no boundaries to carbon emissions. There's no boundaries to carbon, extreme weather events that happen because of our Arctic amplification, that happens because of having too much carbon in the atmosphere. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we are all, we're all in this together. We're all gonna experience the detrimental effects of climate change. And ideally, I would like to see that by taking steps at a local stage, like I said, just like very easily, just like making sure that we handle adaptation measures everywhere and equitably, because there's already places that have adaptation measures, and then also ensure that we're doing our part so that globally the emissions are reduced.
No, thank you for that, and thank you for your inspiration, right? Really, as Councillor Rutherford said, you're the biggest stakeholders in this, and it's for your future. So thank you. Really appreciate your reminder to us. Yeah. Okay, so that concludes the questions on this. And we have about 50 minutes to get through the agenda. You can step back now. Thank you. All right. We are want to see, I know Councillor Stevenson will have a subsequent on 7.3 that we can deal with later. Yeah, or make a note of the motion. And Councillor Rice, you still have questions on Home Water Trust Edmonton, right?
I'm willing to support to get this 7.3 and for the agreement to get done. For my question, I'm looking for the different opportunity. Okay. As long as there's no motion, no debate.
Okay, yeah. So you just, can you move it?
Yeah, I could.
Okay. So like you move it to bring forward? Can you move to bring forward 7.3?
Mayor, so just to reaffirm, 7.2 has also not been dealt with. We finished hearing from the public.
I'm sorry, missed it. Sorry.
7.2 has not been dealt with either. We left after hearing from administration and the public.
Oh yeah, we'll come back to that. I just want to bring forward 7.3, vote on it, then we'll come back to 7.2. Okay, go ahead. Can you bring forward 7.3, Councillor Rice?
So I move that the 7.3 and move forward.
Okay, thank you. Please vote.
Waiting on one vote.